We're going to continue with our series, Summer Playlist. Today's message is entitled, Remember. Remember, remember. I've shared with you that the Psalms are a vital part of my relationship with the Lord. And one of the reasons that's the case is the Psalms tend to bear the soul. They use an array of human emotions as a catalyst to reach out to God. You know, through the years, people have rejected what they might call emotionalism. Oh, that's emotionalism. Don't be emotional. Be a person of faith. But I've never ascribed to that idea, and obviously we all have varying degrees of expression. Some of us, there are certain emotions that we trend toward, but emotions in and of themselves are not bad. Now, when our soul is unhealthy, we might express emotions in an unhealthy way, but emotions were given to us by the Lord. And I believe the reason we have emotions is so that we can leverage them to commune with God in a deeper, more meaningful way. And even some of the painful or more difficult emotions can be a catalyst to launch us into deep communion with the Lord. And so this psalm that we're going to dive into today, Psalm 126, is one of those that has emotions under the surface. You read it and it doesn't necessarily seem like an emotionally charged psalm until you start breaking down the meaning when the writer composed it. And so before we get to Psalm 126, I do have a question. Who in this room has a good memory? Way more ladies raised your hand than fellas. Michelle has an impeccable memory. A steel trap. Forgets nothing. I really do believe that when you get married, the Lord dispenses a supernatural grace on wives to remember. A lot. In vivid detail. Me, I can remember, listen, I've got a good memory in some areas. I can remember and talk for hours about the 1989 and 1990 Tennessee Vols. I'm talking about I could go down the list and talk about it for hours. But I sometimes can't remember why I walked in a room. And it is a little bit of a bone of contention in our marriage at times because Michelle will ask me to do something. And I'm like, yeah, I got it. And it just goes right in and out. The memory doesn't grab it. She comes back in the room 5 minutes later and it hasn't been done. Can anybody testify to that? It just kind of doesn't lodge in there anywhere. I mean, some of you got a memory. And a memory is valuable. It's precious. I believe, is a beautiful gift that the Lord gives us. Now, we tend to, in various circles, hear people encourage us to stay focused on the present. And I think that is sage wisdom. I think that is good advice. I don't think that you can have the dreams of the future that God has for you unless you have a focused, well-stewarded present. There is value in staying in the present. And others, especially in ministry circles, will tell you to be a visionary for the future. Have vision for the future. And that's good wisdom too. We need to be mindful of where the Lord is taking us. But we also tend to hear things like, let go of the past. Let's move on from the past. But I would submit to you today that revisiting the past is every bit as important as being focused on the present and being a visionary for the future. As a matter of fact, I believe that without a well-reminisced past, it is hard at times to live in the present, and it is hard to see down the road into the future. Much of what has happened to you is what has led to now and is informing who you are going to be. I believe a memory is a tremendous fuel for faith and worship. Your memory is a catalyst. Your memory is a weapon in your hand, should you choose to leverage it well, that can propel you into incredible faith. This psalm that we're going to read really is a faith-building psalm, and I want us to be a faith-filled church. I want us to see the world through the prism of God's will. I want us to look at our environment with eyes of hope and possibility, with this intense belief that God will work a miracle, God will come through, God will be faithful. But how do you get there? Well, sometimes you got to go back before you can move ahead. And so how do I leverage my memory for spiritual propulsion? Let's read Psalm 126 together. I'm just going to read the first verse, talk a while about it, and then I'll get to verse 2 and 3. We'll just break it down a little at a time. Here's Psalm 126, 1. When the Lord brought back his exiles to Jerusalem, it was like a dream. This is one psalm in the catalog known as the Psalms of Ascent. It was a collection of psalms that the Israelites would sing and recite on pilgrimage to the holy city of Jerusalem to meet with God. These were, in essence, their worship songs that ushered them into God's presence. And right here in the middle of the compilation is this statement about being brought back from exile to Jerusalem, and it being like a dream. So the history of this psalm is that Israel unfortunately had a tendency in the Old Testament to allow their allegiance to drift, to allow their affections to gravitate toward the society around them. They had this propensity of trying to mix and mingle their worship of God Yahweh along with all of the other little g gods and idols that were surrounding them. The problem with that is it would cause themselves to be positioned outside of God's gracious protection. They would come out of alignment with God, and they would put themselves in line with potential calamity. On one such era, this happened to Israel. They got out of order. They began to search out other gods. And as a result, the Babylonian Empire, which was surging across the planet at that time, showed up on their doorstep. And when Babylon showed up in Jerusalem, they ransacked the city. They razed it, and I don't mean raised it up. I mean they razed it to the ground. They burned it, they destroyed it, they pulled it apart. The holy temple of God was decimated, and it was left just as a field of debris and nothingness, just the remnants of what once was. A part of that typical conquering experience, or rather the being conquered experience, is that oftentimes in that day, the conquering empire would take a collection, often a large collection of the people they conquered, and bring them on exile back to their capital. When we get to the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, we see that that is what has happened. This psalm has a lot of connection to the book of Daniel because Daniel was among many, many Israelites who were in Babylonian captivity, in exile, under the oppressive rule of Babylon. They would bring the people back to Babylon in hopes of corrupting their ideas about God, inundating them with Babylonian culture, and ultimately causing them to become Babylonian in their ideology. And so that was what was taking place. Can you imagine a people having been free, having a beautiful holy city, having a temple of magnificence that God's presence dwelled in, an opposing empire coming and taking everything from you and taking you back to their land, and all that was familiar, all that you loved, all that was precious is now out of your grasp? There's another psalm that I'd like to read to you. It's more of a poetic rendering of the emotional state of the Israelites when they went into exile. It's actually Psalm 137, using one psalm to give context to another psalm. I want to read this Psalm 137. It is the psalm of the exiles, and this is what it sounds like. Beside the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept as we thought of Jerusalem. We put away our harps. We hung them on the branches of the poplar trees. Basically, we quit singing. We quit dancing. We quit worshiping. Our song had come to an end. Our captors demanded a song from us. Our tormentors insisted on a joyful hymn. Sing us one of your songs of Jerusalem. But how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a pagan land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget how to play the harp. May my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth if I fail to remember you, if I don't make Jerusalem my greatest joy. I don't know if you could feel the grief. I don't know if you could feel the pain of an exiled people. Oh Lord, remember what the Edomites did. There's pain, and then sometimes pain turns to another emotion called anger or rage or hatred. Remember what the Edomites did on the day the armies of Babylon captured Jerusalem. Destroy it, the Edomites yelled. Level it to the ground. And it just keeps getting darker as their emotions bubble to the surface. Oh, Babylon, you will be destroyed. Happy is the one who pays you back for what you've done to us. These are God's people. And this last verse shows you just how destitute they were in their heart. Happy is the one who takes your babies and smashes them against the rocks. That doesn't sound especially biblical, does it? But there it is in the Bible. It doesn't feel very Christian or Christ-like, does it? Yet there it is. I wonder if anybody in the room has ever felt the crush, the press, the pain pressing against your faculties to the degree that you thought, said, and did things that you would not normally think, say, and do. I wonder if on some level you have a personal experience where you can identify with these people, where something comes out of you that doesn't necessarily fit the Christian lexicon. It isn't necessarily congruent with the faith-filled experience, but you are feeling such angst that you are hurting. That's where these people were. I don't know if anybody in this room has ever dealt with such financial lack that you were beginning to wonder if God was actually faithful. You sing the songs, but you're not sure. I wonder if anybody in this room has ever felt the ache in your bones of your kids taking a path that you knew was destructive. And no matter what you did, they just seemed determined to go in that direction. I don't know if anybody knows or remembers what it feels like for the car to break down. And you have to pay out of pocket for the expenses because the warranty's long gone. And just as you get that check wrote or that expense out, one of the kids busts their head or breaks their arm and you got to take them to the ER. And the expenses are more than your insurance will cover, and you have to spend weeks contending with the insurance agency to cover the cost. And then something else comes your way. Maybe the rent went up a couple $100 for the month, or property taxes went up, and you find yourself with more going out than coming in. I don't know if anybody has ever experienced that pain, that stress, that pressing. I don't know if anybody here has ever been in the throes of sickness. Your body wretched with pain, lied up in a bed or laid up in a hospital, and you're wondering, because the duration of the sickness has been so lengthy, if I am ever going to feel the regaining of my health. Am I ever going to feel normal again? Am I ever going to feel strong again? I don't know if anybody's ever experienced what it feels like when somebody takes the knife and they slip it into your back and they say things about you that you know aren't accurate, and they reject you in the deepest ways, and it hurts. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced that. I don't know if there's somebody in this room that knows what it's like for somebody to promise they're going to love you and then them not love you the way they promised. for somebody to have a title in your life, a role in your life that would indicate they're supposed to nurture and care for you, but they did not nurture and care for you. I don't know if anybody in this room knows what it's like to be a son of an absent father or the daughter of an emotionally detached mother. I don't know if anybody knows what it's like to experience that kind of pain or that kind of difficulty where the calendar keeps flipping day after day, and it is just a Groundhog's Day of calamities. And you stand there wondering, God, is the sun ever going to break through? Is there going to be relief ever coming over the crest of the horizon? Is there going to be a moment when you deliver me from this? I don't know if you've ever felt that. But that's what these people were feeling when they were in exile, when they were in bondage. This is not what I signed up for. This is not the way I thought it would go. The psalmist was alluding to the fact that there was a day when it was a mess. But history teaches us, especially through the book of Ezra, that there were a couple of kings, Cyrus and Darius, from the empire of Persia. The Persian Empire overtook the Babylonian Empire. The Israelites are still in bondage. But through the sovereignty and providence of God, Cyrus and Darius began to loosen their grip on the Israelites. And in loosening their grip, they actually permitted them, a contingent of them, to go back and rebuild the city and rebuild the temple. And they sent them with permission, with protection, and with provision to do what God wanted them to do. I don't know if you're grabbing all the dots and putting them together, but to be in such despair, but then to watch God orchestrate the situation so that now you go from exile on a return trip home and you get to be a part of the rebuilding of the life that you once knew. So when the psalmist said it was like a dream, let me just read it again. When the Lord brought back his exiles to Jerusalem, it was like a dream. The psalmist was alluding to how desolate it was, how dark it was, how hard it was back then. Oh, but when God came through, it felt like a dream. I wonder if there's anybody in this room that remembers when God came through. Anybody in this room that has a file in your memory that tells you that God is faithful and God is good. It might have took a minute. It might have took 12 weeks. It might have took 12 years. But here you are on this morning in July and you got a memory. You got a memory. You've got a story. Some of you know what it was like to be laying on your deathbed. Know what it's like to laying there with a diagnosis that was at best uncertain. But you felt your body gaining strength and you begin to rise up out of that sickness. And here you sit in this service this morning, healthy and whole and protected and cared for. I wonder if anybody in the room knows what that's like. I wonder if anybody here knows what it's like to at one time not have enough in the checking account. At one time not have enough coming in to cover what's going out. But God gave you a promotion. God gave you a raise. God gave you another job. A check showed up in the mail and then you were able to get ahead. And now here you are all these years later and you are taken care of because God came through. I wonder if anybody's got a memory in this place. I wonder if anybody knows what it's been like to be rejected and overlooked, to be undervalued, but the radiance of God's goodness and favor shine upon you, and it don't matter what anybody has said. He elevates you above all the haters, above all of those that were doubters, and He sets your feet right in the middle of the soil that He planned for you, and you flourish. I don't know if anybody knows what that's like. I wonder if there's anybody in the room that has a memory. If there's anybody in the room that can testify that I wasn't loved the way I should have been loved, I wasn't cared for the way I should have been cared for, but God in His beauty, God in His knowledge brought love back around to my doorstep again, and I'm sitting right next to the grace and goodness of God. I wonder if anybody in this room knows what that is like. I don't know if you know what it's like to see that kid that had gone wandering away. And now you stand like the good father with your feet on the property, looking toward the horizon, and one day that son or daughter crested the hill. Their silhouette might have been hunched over, they might have been a broken mess, but God brought them home, and they are in His house, in His family. Anybody ever had a prodigal show back up? It was like a dream. It was like a dream. God showed up for me. God showed up for me. After all the pain and difficulty, after all the struggle, you found yourself standing, looking at this God of ours who has a way of turning the tide, changing the narrative, healing the body, fixing the circumstances. That's what they were saying as they sang going into the city. Hey, y'all, there was a time when all of this was destroyed. There was a time as we entered this city when this was just a bunch of rubble, scattered to and fro. This place had been decimated. The weeds are waist high. There's all wealth has been stripped. There's no life therein but God. Oh, y'all, look, I know that's old school, that's antiquated. Some might call it a little cheesy, but I'm here to tell you, but God is very much a thing. All of the evidence said one thing, but God said something else. And what God said trumped all of the evidence. But God, I'm a living epistle of but God. My whole life has been lived under the flow of but God. Every time you turn around, but God. He'll do it. He's faithful. He's good. He's just. He's kind. He is willing in every way. And we have a responsibility to reminisce about what He's done for us. We don't just put it in a box and move on with our lives. No, we have a responsibility every once in a while to go back to the file and pull out the card and recite the works of the Lord in our life. To remind ourselves, to remember just how good God is. I don't know what you're going through right now, but I bet you can look back somewhere and see that God's hand was on you, and that God gave you a miracle, and that God was faithful. You just got to look. You got to look at the right thing. Your memory is sacred. Just because everybody has a memory doesn't mean memory is common. It's sacred. When you remember, you are remembering yourself. You are reliving when God put you back together. We look to the New Testament and Paul talks about we're one body, many parts. Another word there is member. The idea of being parts of the body. When you go back and remember God's faithfulness, you are remembering yourself. When you go back and think about what He's done, joy comes back and gets in place. When you remember what God has done, He remembers peace back into the fiber of your being. When you remember what He's done, He puts faith back into socket so you can stand the test in the moment. I would just submit to you, it's important to remember when you're going through it. It's important to remember when everything is sunny and great, because you are fortifying yourself. You are putting yourself together every single time. We remember, and He puts us back together. Look, I know some memories are painful. I know some of that back there hurts. You might even use language like it triggers me. It's a wound. I heard Pastor Anthony Daly say this week, though, there's a difference between a wound and a scar. A scar means it's healed. There's just evidence that something happened. For some of you, you need to get the revelation that you ain't wounded. It's scarred. The Lord has healed you. The Lord's done a work on the inside of you. He has taken care of you. Look, I know it's hard at times to look back because of what happened and what took place. And I'm not trying to rub salt on a wound. I just want to encourage you to look back again, because the thing the enemy was trying to use as a trigger, the Lord wants to put His hand on it. Like, He doesn't just cover it up with dirt so you forget it or you're numb to it or you don't feel it. He wants to reverse engineer your life if you'll allow it. And He'll go back and He'll put His finger on it. As a matter of fact, I would submit to you, if you look again and you look with the right eyes, my suspicion is in the middle of whatever was going on, the smoke, the rubble, the disaster of that season of your life, there is a silhouette of a man who was and is to come, that was standing in the midst of your mess, having never left you nor forsaken you, having always had His eye and His mind on you. So when you look back at the pain, I would just encourage you, take a double take, because He's in there somewhere. The day you got saved, He reached back to that day to redeem it and make it valuable, to make it a weapon in your hand. Don't let the enemy lie to you and tell you you're wounded because of that, and the rest of your life you'll live in reaction to that. Don't let the devil lie to you like that. I get there's a need for counseling. I get that sometimes it takes time, but do not accept the lie that I've got to live the rest of my life with that thing dictating the terms. There is a man who saved you. He restored you and He made you new. And He didn't just save you from today going forward. He saved all your days. He renewed them and made them new. He healed, He fixed, He repaired, He recovered. So keep looking. Let's progress in the psalm. Psalm 126, verses 2 through 3. We were filled with laughter, and we sang for joy. And the nation said, what amazing things the Lord has done for them. Yes, the Lord has done amazing things for us. You know, when we sing around here, it's not rote, it's not ritual, it's not form or formality. We're singing as people who have joy over what God's done in our life. When we sing a song talking about the evidence, there should be something that bubbles up on the inside of you like, yeah, I'm one of those. I'm one of those. I'm one of those that I see the evidence of His goodness in every single crevice of my life. When you begin to remember what He's done, joy rises up in you. A couple of years ago, one of my longtime friends and his family came into town, and we had Nashville Shores. I've talked to y'all about Nashville Shores. We had Nashville Shores season passes, and so we had like a free day for friends and family. So we took them to Nashville Shores. Kids had a great time. We sat and talked at the wave pool. I did put my feet in it. I thought they were the safest thing to not catch anything anyway. And we talked, and we just began to reminisce. So this was my best friend in college. He was my roommate, and we did stupid stuff. I don't even want to tell you half the stupid stuff we did. I mean, we put people's beds on the roof. There was one guy that we took all of his clothes out of his closet. He left his door unlocked, so we took all his clothes out of his closet and put price tags on them and hung them through the halls and sold them. Me and my buddy, There was another time, I don't even know, like if there's any fire marshals in the room, just go ahead and have mercy on me. There was one time I thought it would be funny to pull the fire alarm. So like 19-year-old Jeremy was stupid. And it was funny for a minute. I pulled the fire alarm at about 3 in the morning. About 400 or 500 guys are standing out in the front lawn. I was over in the corner thinking, this is awesome. And then somebody snitched on me. Only one person knew, so I mean, and so I almost got kicked out of Bible college. So don't pull the fire alarm. It's serious. But we just started laughing about all the stuff. And I got done at the end and told Michelle, that was so good for my heart. Just laughing, reminding ourselves, remembering with a good friend. It's like when you get around your family at Thanksgiving, Christmas, and you just start telling old stories that you've told 100 times. But you laugh every single time because of the relational connection. I just want you to know that there is a correlation when you sit down with your friend Jesus. When you sit down with your family, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and you start recalling your history with Him, something is altered in you. Something you can be dealing with anything in the world, but you just sit down with Him and have a dialogue about what He has done, and your spirit, your soul is changed. If you like practical stuff, here's practical. Walk down memory lane with God regularly. It will change your worldview. It will change your emotional perspective, and it will cause the fruit of the Spirit to burst on the inside of you. Remind yourself. I love what it says. It says the nations were watching. The nations were watching as God showed favor to them and helped them rebuild. We need to tell the world, but one of, if not the greatest sign and a wonder in the earth to our city, to the world around us, is your rebuilt life. The fact that you were here, but God got in the middle of it, and now you're here. It's a sign and a wonder, and the nations are watching. The people around you are watching, and it causes them to perceive God differently, and it might end up leading them down to praising the Lord with their life. We go to verse 4. Restore our fortunes, Lord, as the streams renew the desert. I alluded to this a little last week when we talked about the Valley of Weeping. It's thought that the desert they were referencing was the Negev desert, which was very dry, very arid. Had the typical ditches, ruts, gullies, indentations. And on occasion, a rain would come fast and hard. And when it did, it would just flush through the land, finding every crack, every spot, every indentation, every place where water could gather. And suddenly that which was dead had come back to life, and green vegetation would sprout up pretty quickly thereafter. Stuff that was dormant under the surface would suddenly show up. And when the psalmist says to send these streams of refreshing, remember, he is saying it in the context of, we've already seen you do a lot, God. We've already seen you do a lot. And in part, I believe the psalmist was saying, but there's more to be done. But I also think he was saying, hey, Lord, would you do it again? Would you move on our behalf again? Would you show up for us again? Like streams, just with the quickness, with like rains out of nowhere. Would you show up and bless us again? Would you take care of us again? I just want you to hear, God is a do-it-again Father. He's a do-it-again Father. You know, when my son and I, when he was little, and God bless, he's here, he's usually not. But when he was little, we would wrestle and play a lot. And we had this thing we would do where I would pick him up and I would throw him on the bed. Now, I am an overly cautious dad who doesn't want to go to the ER. And so I would have him do his arms like this, terrified that he would put an arm down and we'd be at the ER. Every parent, especially you older parents are way cooler than us. You'd send them out with a torch, a switchblade, and 3 shotgun shells in their pocket, a piece of beef jerky, and say, I'll see you at midnight. Like, y'all are way cooler than us, all right? All the older parents in the room, you're cooler than us. 100%. I'm over here saying, fold your arms. But I would pick him up and I would throw him on the bed. And it was, when he was little, it was just a delight-filled exchange. And he would say, do it again. Do it again. And there was something in Dad that so enjoyed the delight I witnessed in him that I was compelled to do it again. I just need you to hear that your Father delights in your delight. He celebrates in your celebration. And He loves to bless you. He loves to move on your behalf. He loves to be faithful in ways that you didn't necessarily expect, ways that you weren't sure was possible. We used to work for a lady named Karen Wheaton, and I've talked about her song before. She used to sing this song, He'll do it again. He'll do it again. Just take a look at where you are now and where you've been. Hasn't He always come through for you? He's the same now as then. You may not know how, you may not know when, but He'll do it again. And hasn't He always come through for you? He's the same now as then. You may not know how, you may not know when, but He'll do it again. I just know that that's who He is because I've lived 44 years and I've watched Him do it over and over and over again. If the band will come, you don't have to play that song, but just come play something. He's faithful. He's good. He's kind. He's generous. He's attentive. He's not ignorant of your plight. He's not absent-minded of your circumstance. He's not aloof to your scenario. He's not indifferent to your struggles. He's not callous because He's seen so much and you're just another number on the list. No, He is a Father who rebuilds. He is a Father who restores. He is a Father who renews and regenerates. My question is, are we a people who remember? Are we a people who remember? Are we a people who reminisce? Are we a people who are willing to look again? You know, I love what it says in the last couple of verses. Those who plant in tears will harvest with shouts of joy. They weep as they go plant their seed, but they sing as they return with the harvest. You might be crying. You might be weeping. You might be broken. You might be struggling. You might be hoping. You might be longing. But those who sow in the weeping, your tears water the soil. And the Lord sees every tear and He bottles it up. And you can rest assured every seed that hits the ground, He'll make sure a harvest comes from it. He'll make sure something faithful is done. So my call to you is keep sowing. It might not be going the way you want it to right now, but keep putting seed in the ground. It might not be ideal, but keep planting. Keep walking through the field, giving God something to work with. You might be waiting a long time. You might be deep into your waiting, but just keep planting. And it's okay if you're crying. It's okay if there's some struggle. It's okay if there's some uncertainty. It's okay if you're not sure. Just remember that He's faithful and that seeds become something fruitful. And just remember too, delay is not denial. Seed takes time. They were in exile, but rebuilding was coming. They were in exile, but rebuilding was coming. I don't know what you're experiencing today. Some of you, again, the sun may be shining on you from all directions. But if that's you, there's still a whole lot to praise Him for. There's still a whole lot to thank Him for. And for those of you that the sun is shining on every arena of your life today, let me just call you to be a worshiper. Let me call you to be a person who praises. Let me call you to be somebody that just goes back over and over and over again. But there's others in the room that you're going through it. You're waiting. It hadn't been put back together yet. It hadn't been fixed yet. It hadn't been repaired yet. And what I want to ask you to do today is remind yourself of what God's done. I want you to close your eyes with me.